and private discrimination against non-whites and the poor. Affirmative action and the war on poverty were designed in the 1960s to right those very real wrongs. They are number 8. Good intention gone wrong. What's wrong with affirmative action, Troy?
Well, we use that word very broadly. I think we really need to break down affirmative action into different parts. I don't think anybody, left, middle, or right, has a problem with outreach. If you're a city or a state and you want to hire firefighters or policemen, I think it's fine. I think we all agree it's okay to run ads on mainstream newspapers, minority radio stations, and say applications are available. Please sign up, and we come in and we'd love to hear from you. I think that's fine. Where you start running into trouble is when you say, okay, we want applicants, and let's say if we have a test to see who can get in. If you're white, you need 90 to 100. If you're Hispanic, you need 80 to 90. And if you're black, you can get by with a score of 70. And you see in municipalities and school districts here in New York State and elsewhere, when you have things like tests for employment, educational proficiency tests, and so on, you have different standards for people based on what their ethnicity is. And if that isn't racist, I don't know what is. I think that sort of thing is horrible. I think you have to have one standard. If you need to give people extra tutoring or extra help, fine. But when the test is given, everyone has to get above a 90 to be hired, or 85, or whatever the number is to be hired, independent of what your racial background is.
Camille, do you think that affirmative action has done material damage? Has it made things worse?
Well, it's difficult to say. I mean, I've seen studies on both sides of this issue, some suggesting that when, in fact, a minority student who probably wouldn't have gotten in otherwise to an elite school goes there, that they sometimes have a difficult time getting acclimated and that they underperform and probably would have been better served going someplace else. It's not clear to me whether or not that's the case. What is clear, though, is whether or not they're underperforming, people's perception of those students when they go to apply for a job is oftentimes hindered because of the existence of policies like this. So that is one very real unintended consequence, whether or not the other question really bears out.
Well, in one place these policies are definitely failing is in the public eye, with large majorities saying we're not in favor of racial discrimination explicitly. And one of the recent campaigns in California to reinstate them was pushed back by none other than Asian American minority, because they are least benefited by these policies and often harmed by them. Because
government is always like trying to find the few places in life and society where there is a zero-sum game and then pushing their thumb on the scale. A thing to me that's interesting about affirmative action in some weird senses is that people don't really talk about it that much. It comes up every now and again at the Supreme Court talking about university admissions, but that is this much of affirmative action. It's actually all kinds of local government hiring and all kinds of ways it's pervasive. No one is making an issue of this really anymore politically, which in some senses might be a good thing, but maybe it's allowing for bad policies to live on.
Well, I think in a lot of these instances, what we do is we're fighting the symptoms rather than the causes. I mean, rather than say, okay, let's adjust the test for the fire department, why don't we say, look, what we really need to do is get minority kids as educated as possible, focus on that, and if they're smart enough because they've gotten great educations from K through 12, they're not going to have any problem with that test, and they'll pass it as well as the kids in the suburbs. If you have rotten schools in the inner cities where the kids aren't learning anything, they're going to come into that test room maybe not as well prepared as kids living in Bel Air, Beverly Hills, Westchester, Palm Beach, where have you. And I'd really rather see the focus on how do we get those kids as bright as possible rather than how do we toy around with this little test when they're 18, 25, 30 years old.
All right, Troy, thank you very much. Coming up, our countdown.